everyone. Good morning and welcome to our webinar, AI Act and the Battle Against AI-Driven Identity Frauds and what it means for your business in 2025. My name is Pinar Alpay, Chief Product and Marketing Officer at Signicat. And thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. AI-driven identity fraud is growing rapidly. And regulations like the AI Act will have a profound impact on how businesses approach fraud prevention. Businesses like Signicat, but also your businesses as well. But before we dive into today's agenda, I would love to introduce you Brent Dalager from KPMG, who will be sharing key insights on the AI Act. Brent is partner and head of innovation and head of NewTech at KPMG. He has over 30 years of consulting experience and has collaborated with top organizations such as Nordic, Danske Bank, and many more. Bent also holds an MSc in computer science focused on AI. He helps businesses navigate the complexities of AI regulation and is a frequent speaker at AI conferences. He also holds a seat at the advisory committee of the Danish FSA, Financial Services Authority. Welcome, Bent.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. And we're happy to have you. Now, let me give you a quick overview of what we will be covering today. We'll begin with looking at some numbers at the growing threat of AI-driven identity fraud and why it's a critical concern for businesses. And here I will be giving you insights from Signicat's own data, but also some Signicat's, a survey that Signicat has conducted last year with Consult Hyperion, as well as some external data from the press. Then we'll hear from Bent, who will give an overview of the AI Act, the timeline and key compliance requirements. Following this, we'll talk about the impact of the AI Act on identity verification and fraud prevention and share practical steps businesses can take to comply with the AI Act while continuing to innovate in the fight against AI-driven identity fraud. And finally, we will open up for Q&A session to answer your questions. You can submit your questions in the chat, which you will find in your screen. Okay. But before we start, we'd like to ask you, do a little poll on how familiar you are with the AI Act. Please take a moment to respond to the poll on your screen. We'll wait as you respond on your screen. We have a little bit of a delay as people respond. Katre, how long should we? Oh, yeah, results are coming in. Let's wait for a bit more. We don't have a lot of people that say they are very familiar, but a good number of the respondents are somewhat familiar. And there's quite a bit, 42, oh, it's changing as well, 40% saying not familiar at all. The number keeps changing. So, Bent, what are your thoughts on the results that we see on screen?
Yeah, well, I think it's expected that we will not see a lot of people that are highly familiar, of course, especially in this setting where this is about the AI Act. On the not familiar at all, it's not so unexpected either. However, this is indeed very important because there are certain areas that every company needs to be aware of. And therefore, at least getting to this, you can say, somewhat familiar is important. And in this webinar, I mean, using 15 minutes, we will not get anyone to the very familiar, but at least get them to somewhat, if not more.
Exactly. I think that's a really good objective to have. By the end of this discussion, hopefully all of you will be somewhat familiar with the AI Act and what it means for you. Okay, now let's begin by looking at why AI-driven fraud is escalating and why this issue is more urgent than ever. Let me, let's talk about background on AI threats. So, AI fraud is on the rise, right? I'd like to start by sharing key findings from Signicat's report, Battle Against AI-Driven Identity Fraud. And this research we have conducted with Consult Hyperion last year. You can also find this report on Signicat website and download the whole contents. I'm going to give you a bit of a glimpse from the report today. The report highlights with a worrying 80% rise in fraud attempts over the past 3 years. Probably not super surprising that fraud attempts have risen significantly. But what's more interesting is that 42.5% of these fraud cases now involve AI. And 29% of these attempts are deemed successful. So that is the sort of the worrying part, I think, here. What is also interesting is that deepfake attacks have increased by more than 2,000% within the last 3 years. Now, based on Signicat's own data, 6.5% of fraud attempts now use deepfakes. The number 3 years ago was 0.1%. And this number that we see, 6.5%, is actually an average over industries. When you look at more financially beneficial industries where doing deepfakes is more financially lucrative, for example, consumer loans, etc., this number is a lot higher. What about the financial consequences of AI-driven fraud? Well, it is quite significant. In our survey, approximately 38% of fraud-related revenue loss is attributed to AI-enhanced attacks, which is quite significant. Now, some data. So this data is coming from an external resource. What it says is that incidents of credential phishing have surged by 967%, and AI-generated phishing emails have increased by over 1,200% since late 2022. These attacks, and what's also interesting is that these attacks are becoming much more sophisticated with the rise of Gen AI, and it's becoming more and more harder to detect them, raising the risks for both businesses and consumers. Voice cloning scams are also on the rise. In the past year, 28% of the people have fallen victim to these scams. So almost between 1/3 and 1/4 have fallen victim. And however, what's interesting is that 46% are still unaware of this threat. AI makes it possible for fraudsters to mimic voices with super high accuracy, making fake calls sound real. In addition, with the AI, Gen AI, the scale of these attacks is also becoming much larger. We believe that we are at an inflection point on AI-driven identity fraud. So this highlights the need for better awareness and stronger security measures, and fast. To address these growing risks, regulatory frameworks like the AI Act are being introduced. The AI Act establishes stringent guidelines for the responsible use of AI, particularly in high-risk areas like identity verification. Businesses must implement stronger fraud prevention strategies and ensure at the same time consumer protection is observed while balancing the compliance and innovation in this fight against AI-driven fraud. So with that, I'll hand over to Bent, who will talk more about the AI Act. and its impact on businesses and how we can, establish the balance. Bent, over to you now.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I will give you sort of a quick view on what is the AI Act and also what to do sort of now. So just quickly, I just need to make sure I can actually change the slide. Hopefully you can see it changed now. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So this was just about me, and I think most of this was already mentioned. Maybe I should just add that I'm also sort of advising the Danish government sort of on the use of AI across the organization. So and the background is really that this is coming from a long history of doing a lot of AI solutions, implementing them, advising around them. But it's two things. What is the AI Act and what's the impact for your company? So first of all, when it comes to the AI Act, it's important to understand what is AI. I mean, because that has actually been one of the things that has been discussed. When we talk about AI and the regulation, this is a slide that is often used, which is just saying that actually still the situation is that no continent outside EU has a regulation on AI. So that's just a thing to remember. And AI, in terms of the definition, some long time to actually agree on, and they finally agreed on this definition here, which is that this is a machine-based system, which is AI, EU lingo for software, basically, with varying levels of autonomy that infers from the input it receives how to generate output. So what does that mean? It actually means that if you talk about AI, sort of the real definition of AI is that artificial intelligence is if you are using software that is able to perform tasks that normally would require human or other biological intelligence. That would be artificial intelligence. So things like software, robots, rule-based systems are a part of the normal definition, but it's not a part of the EU definition, which makes a lot of sense, because the problem is that if you use rules to actually create something that looks like artificial intelligence, then all coding could, from a legal standpoint, be AI, which is of course not the case. So they have, and which I also have been part of, they have restricted the AI to be only the AI that is able to basically find its own way through, basically find its own patterns. So not being taught that if it meets this thing, then you need to go to the left. If you meet this, it goes to the right, but actually finds its own patterns. And that's what happens with machine learning. Machine learning is really based on statistics. You can say it's a classic. If you have a statistics, it will normally be, are you getting cancer from smoking, for instance, and then you can correlate this in a statistical method, for instance, a linear regression. And then what you do in machine learning is you constantly are changing the attributes and finding out which patterns are you seeing. This is very, very used also for fraud detection, by the way, by a number of companies and to an increasing degree. The second level here is neural networks, where it's not really statistics on steroids, but it's actually trying to simulate the human brain, and the data is not sort of condensed into a file or anything. It's actually the data will be congested into a neural network and will be distributed across the network. So that's where the learning is. It makes it very hard to share data, by the way, but it's quite impactful if it's learned. If it gets an enormous amount of data, then it's able to do very good predictions. This is also what is normally used for recognition techniques, for instance. And generative AI is sort of the new kid on the block, and it creates some issues. It has actually postponed the EU regulation because they didn't think this was coming. They didn't know, and it came as a big surprise. So they needed to make new regulation before they actually were finalizing the EU Act. And they call it not generative AI, but foundational models, but it's the same. And that's what you know as, for instance, ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot. So the ability for AI to actually, with a certain input, which can be very short, how can I how can I build an igloo on Greenland? Then it will come with a lot of answers for that. And so it can generate data. It's not only a consumption of data. And it's also able actually to make models. So you can actually make a model using generative AI. And that gives some issues from a legal standpoint that I will get back to. However, when it comes to the EU Act, I mean, this is a simple model. It's basically a risk-based approach where they are saying we are dividing the rule set into what is the risk level of the AI being used. So at one place we have the unacceptable risk, and that is, for instance, biometric face recognition in public places. It is subliminal use of AI to actually create other behaviors. It is, for instance, that you use AIs in toys to talk to kids and make them do dangerous things. There's a number of things there, but most of them will not be relevant for you. Then we have the high risk. I will get back to the high risk, but for instance, this use of facial recognition is one of the biometric, identification is one of them. But I'll just come back to the list in a moment. The limited risk is where you only are requiring transparency. And that is basically things like chatbots, for instance, that are performing a certain task. And the low to minimal risk is really on things like using AI for making games. So those are the four areas. So one is the black one is prohibited. You're not allowed to use it. High risk, you can use it, but you have obligations. Limited risk, you just need to say that this is done by a bot. This is not a human responding. And then you have low to minimal risk really on doing nothing when you're using it. So coming back to what it means, it overall, you can think about the AI Act as trying to make sure that AI is not having a big impact on a citizen in a wrongful way. So what can be a big impact? Well, that is, you have critical infrastructure. So for instance, power generation for houses, that has to be controlled. Education of people in society, of course. Product safety, the same thing. And then HR and employment, I will get back to that. But this is one of the things where it can impact you, because if you're using AI to, for instance, scan incoming applications or to make job descriptions or to do performance management of the employer of your employers and so on, all that is actually in the high risk area, because it can influence whether a person is getting employed and can influence whether a person is getting fired or promoted. Essential services as well. Some of you will be there. That is about mainly on financial services. So things like giving credit, actually having access to get a loan so you can get a house, getting a pension so you can sustain your life. Those are also on the high risk area. Then you have law enforcement like the police, for instance, like migration, border control, the whole justice area, and also elections. Most of them are probably not in what you are looking at. So what is it that I need to do then? So what should I make sure is happening in the high risk area? So if I'm using, let's say I'm using this for scanning job applications, well, I need to make sure that I'm living up to these criteria. And I'm listing 10 criteria here. There's actually, you can say, only 9. The last one is something that I, from a KPMG standpoint, is promoting, which is use of sustainable models, because these models can use a lot of energy. But the 9 other ones are part of the AI Act. So one is fairness. So you need to make sure that when you're using the AI, that the model that you're using, regardless of whether this is generative AI or machine learning or neural networks, you have to make sure that it lives up to the fundamental rights. So it's free from bias, non-explainable bias when it comes to gender, education, gender and religion. And ethnicity, etc. So that FRIA actually needs to be performed. Transparency, that you are able to basically say, okay, but how is this model really? What is getting into the model? What is coming out of the model? It should be transparent how it works, And you should also be able to explain how it works for each singular event that you're using the model. So why is it pointing at this person to be hired and not this person? Then the accountability, there has to be a person that is responsible for really driving the solution. There has to be a risk and quality management system in place for your AI. That's something that unfortunately is not always the case. Data integrity is really to ensure that the data that you're using is something that needs to be used for this model in particular, and that you also are making sure that the data is constantly updated and are correct. Then you have the privacy. The privacy is really about living up to mainly on the GDPR, that you are able and it's okay to use it, and you have consent where you need consent. Safety is very much on the model not creating some issues, is not impacting the society in a wrongful way. And then security, and especially when we in this area of Signicat here, it has to be make sure that this is secure, that you are that there's no fraud is happening, that you are not able to inflict the model and make it do things it shouldn't do, and you're not able to penetrate the model. And then reliability, basically it has to work, So if you look at it across, these are things that is making a lot of sense, but to do this and be able to confirm and also be through an audit of doing it means that you need to do quite some work here. And what is the impact for you as a company? Well, first of all, step one is really to look through the systems that you have. Look through what are you using of AI. And I think one of the things, and I said I would mention this, and now I'm mentioning one of the things that is making a little bit of an issue now is that these foundation models are there. And this means that somebody in your organization can sit and begin to use Gen AI and make a small use of Gen AI where it's specifically trained to do, for instance, performance assessments. And that's something that will be seen as actually being a provider of AI. And then that means that you fall into this area here. You're not just a user, but you're actually a provider of AI, because now you are making your own AI. It's not the way it's performing right out of the box. If you just do ChatGPT, this is what it will use. But if you are putting a lot of extra data into it and then priming it to have a certain output, then you have just created an AI model. And I think that's something that you should be mindful of. So you need to list the systems you have, find out whether they are in the high risk area, and then you need to do the FRIA assessment for these models and also the conformity assessment. The second thing is, well, it actually has to be registered in the public EU database. So this is a keep track, so they know what you have going on. Then you have to establish or at least expand your risk management system so you can follow this. You have to make sure that it lives up to the accuracy and robustness and the cybersecurity testing, that you are not able to penetrate and manipulate the model. And the quality system should be in place as well. Then the governance, probably you need to adjust the governance for how you actually are putting AI into production. Very often it's something that is done while you have maybe a risk committee. Initially, you're just looking at the model and then everything is left to the data scientist, and then suddenly they release the model. That's not good enough. You really have to have business involved and legal involved at different steps in the model creation. I see very often that's not the case. It's only an initial thing you do, and then things are just rolling. And then you need to document what you have been doing. You need to document that it's not having unacceptable bias, and the training is really representative for what you're doing. And everyone knows, okay, but how is this going to be used? And finally, the human oversight is important. Making sure that you can explain it, that it's transparent how it works. You are logging everything, so you are able to backtrack and see, okay, why did it come out and say that you are not allowed to get this credit? What was the reason for this? And what happened exactly? Which data were we using? And then another new thing is the drift monitoring. These models are not like classic models because they can actually be when you're putting data in, it will manipulate not only the output, but it will gradually make the output go in a certain direction. The more you tell it about a certain thing being true, then the model begins to think it's true. I mean, if you use the word think, but that it will influence the model. So it can drift in certain directions, and you need to have procedures for how to avoid the drift and how to do the retraining. And you also need to document how you have a human in the loop, so you constantly are able to correct things if it's going wrong. And then I mean, this is one of the things. Okay, you're saying, yeah, I don't really care about this. It's okay, but it's something that we can do another day. I just want to remind you that this is there's pretty big fines on this, up to 7%. It will normally be in the 4% of the global annual turnover of your company, which is fairly steep. And just so you know, I mean, this takes effect. It's already approved. It's already in effect from a signature perspective, but from a fine perspective, the fines will start by August 26th. So you still have some months for this to work out. So it's actually a fairly short time span you have to get this in order. The good thing is that it's only in certain areas, on biometric recognition, on things that are affecting your customers directly. It's not a B2B thing. I mean, it's only for things that affect your customers directly, and in a way that is sort of a kind of a life event, like promotions, like getting credit, etc. So with that, I will leave it for us to go through. I will just say this is a podcast you can also follow and listen to. All right.
Great. Thank you, Bent, for that great overview of the AI Act. I already see some questions in the chat, which we will get to in a bit. I'd like to focus now on a specific area where these regulations have a significant effect, which is identity verification and fraud prevention. Yeah. Biometric verification methods such as facial recognition and voice authentication are classified as high risk under the AI Act, as we've heard from Bent just now. This means that businesses must meet strict compliance standards when using these technologies. Transparency in AI decision-making is no longer optional. It is a must, legal requirement, and companies need to ensure that their AI systems are explainable, ethical, and secure against misuse. Additionally, robust risk management systems and strategies must be in place to mitigate potential threats and prevent the misuse of sensitive biometric data. With these stringent requirements in mind, it's important to understand the challenges businesses face when combating AI-driven identity fraud. As the numbers from our study show, AI-driven identity fraud isn't just increasing, it's significantly harder to detect, and it's making quite a bit of damage, posing real challenges. And the risks extend beyond financial losses. And non-compliance with regulations like the AI Act can result in substantial fines, while reputational damage from a data breach can be long-lasting. So a security failure can erode customer trust, which can be difficult to rebuild. But given these challenges, it's no surprise that AI-driven identity fraud is a priority for many businesses. In fact, according to our study, over 75% of companies recognize the importance of strengthening their fraud prevention strategies. However, there's a significant gap between awareness and action. According to our study, only 22% of businesses have actually implemented the necessary measures. 74% say that they will do this in the next 12 months, which to me, this disconnect creates a vulnerability and an urgency gap. Because when we were sitting 12 months ago here talking about AI-driven identity fraud, probably we couldn't have expected the levels that we would have come here today. So 12 months from now, we might be in a completely different place. So there is a sort of disconnect and the vulnerability here. While businesses are aware of the threats, they aren't fully equipped to handle them. So what's holding them back? According to our study, one of the main challenges is resource constraints. Many fraud prevention teams operate with limited budgets, small teams, or outdated technologies, which makes it difficult to keep pace with fast-evolving AI-driven threats. Of course, there's also many different priorities, and it makes it difficult to prioritize this. Okay, but how to mitigate AI-driven identity fraud? Signicat is, whenever we're interacting with our customers, we have a few pointers here for companies on what they need to do to mitigate AI-driven identity fraud. The first thing that we advise is to have a multi-layered approach. And what this means is that a single technology or a tool is probably not going to be the silver bullet. A combination of multiple technologies and techniques might be the way to go. And I'm going to double click on this in a minute. The second thing is covering all vulnerable fronts. And what this means is thinking about the user journey or customer journey, all the way from onboarding to sign-ins to, for example, authorizations if your business is doing that, payment authorizations, or e-signatures when you're doing business with your customers, covering all the vulnerable fronts and thinking about them and thinking about which ones are the key, most important ones. The third one is battling AI with AI. And this, of course, is going to be subject to many different regulations now with the AI Act, but it requires massive data analysis, pattern recognition, and predictive analytics capabilities. There are many tools out there that with Gen AI makes very, very sophisticated attacks on your systems possible and at a larger scale. So it's important to stay 2-3 steps ahead of the fraudsters in the use of AI as well. And the fourth thing is education, right? People are always the sort of vulnerable points, and organizations need to prepare employees and customers to be conscious and aware of what threats exist out there. I'm going to now double click on point number 1 and point number 3, and then we will launch into our Q&A. But let me sort of talk a little bit about what I mean by a multi-layered defense. It first starts with early risk assessments. What that means is that at the first stage, when a user or somebody is at your sort of front door, trying to, gain access to your systems, or getting onboarded, or applying for a certain type of loan, what you can do is build a profile and have, for example, velocity checks. How many times has this IP address been trying to access? Geolocation, prior history, email profiles, mobile number profile, device. So you can sort of create, with some behavioral statistics, a risk scoring, which will then help you take the appropriate action. In terms of higher risk, you might have more additional step-ups in the process, or so you can make that trade-off between smooth user journey and more frictionful user journey with additional security checks. If you, for example, find a new SIM registered an hour ago with a geolocation, you can behave very differently. The second step is in the automated user identity verification journey, having very robust methods like, for example, EIDs with risk assessment, but also sophisticated electronic identity document and biometric verification products that also use machine learning to fight against fraud. The third is verification of the data. So this is all about checking the data that you have collected during the identity verification process with different public or the different data sources, so you can corroborate and enhance the data that you have on the user. And then once you have onboarded, of course, the user or your customer, secure login for returning customers, either like with EIDs or strong customer authentication methods like Signicat's mobile ID. When you're doing more business with your customers, having trusted signatures is key. Is the person that's trying to sign this document with you, loan agreement or whatever it is, are they sort of authorized to sign this document? Are they the person that they say they are? And then the choosing right level of assurance, advanced or qualified electronic signatures, depending on the level of assurance that's needed. And then lastly is the sort of ongoing identity monitoring. This is also super key, because once you have onboarded a customer, the data doesn't stay the same. People change locations, people change jobs. So it's important to keep the data that you have current. And what's also important is to employ these different steps in the right way, in the right order, in optimal combination. That's going to create the right balance between three things. Being able to stop the fraud, but also creating and maintaining a great user experience for your customers, and then also keeping the cost down for preventing fraud. So there is a fine balance in being able to do that. So that's what I meant by multi-layered strategy covering all vulnerable fronts. And of course, the third thing that I was talking about was battling AI with AI, just as an example, preventing identity fraud during onboarding. In a product like Signicat's Video ID, where you show, which is a sort of identity document and biometric verification product using video streaming technologies, which makes it very hard to penetrate. And then doing multiple document tampering checks, as well as likeness and liveness checking, and defending against synthetic ID fraud, deep fakes, presentation and injection attacks with multiple different machine learning algorithms. So that's an example of how you would battle AI with AI. And, as I mentioned before, Signicat's study on battle against AI-driven identity frauds, which we've conducted last year, that's available on Signicat's website. And you can download and look at the whole data if you want after the webinar. Now, let's talk about some of the questions that we have. I think the first question there, Bent, is how will the AI Act be supervised? You talked about the different ways that companies need to be compliant. How will EU make sure that this happens?
I mean, from an EU perspective, I think it's very important what we have seen also with GDPR is that if there's something that works, it is actually the risk of large fines. So that is a driver for making this happen in the different companies. And I also think if you're sitting in a company and thinking about, okay, but how can I better my compliance, then the fact that you now have a compliance business case is quite often better than having a classic business use case. Because when it comes to things like fraud, for instance, it can be hard to sort of justify the use case, but it's not very hard to justify that you need to comply with the law.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty, solid driver.
Great, thank you. And there are a few questions that are about this area. So do you see the AI Act as a barrier or an opportunity for businesses to strengthen their fraud prevention strategies? A lot of people on the chat were talking about, will threat levels rise as a result of this act? The thought of, are we allowed to do this, slows the good guys, but the bad guys can do whatever they want. And a lot of these bad guys are maybe from the EU. So what do you suggest there?
Yeah, I think it's very important to really make sure that you're not falling into the trap of sort of saying, okay, then I'm not allowed to do this and this and this and this, because very often that's not correct. It's not the reason. I mean, EU is not trying to make this legislation to make sure that everyone can hack your systems. But I've seen it a lot that things like a wrong interpretation of GDPR is, for instance, apparently preventing you from keeping information on the client that you need to have in order to avoid fraud. But this is all about, getting the right balance, and also getting some advice sometimes about what is actually allowed, because when it comes to fraud prevention, it's a different thing. You have the another kind of assessing a model where it's all about legitimate interest. And this is sometimes forgotten. I mean, it tends to be very much on sort of a normal DPIA, but there's actually what is called a LIA, which has to do with things where it's in the interest of your customer that this AI is working. And that would be a LIA assessment, something I can truly recommend to use.
Yeah, makes total sense. Sometimes we tend to put limits on ourselves, but we need to think about the spirit of the law, what it's trying to do, right? It's
Yes.
trying to protect the citizens. It's not, and protecting the citizens is also about protecting them against fraud.
Yeah, I mean, we had a case where we were looking into whether there was some fraud happening on a number of client accounts. And then sort of the gut reaction from the legal was, oh yeah, but then we need consent from all these different clients to even look into the data. But that's not right. I mean, you actually have the legitimate interest of the client, and this means that you don't have to go out and get 110,000 consents. So for some reason, this tends to be forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. How can businesses future-proof their AI strategies, knowing that these regulations will continue to evolve?
Yes, I think, I mean, personally, and I think it's also sort of the way that we are looking at this. Right now, we don't think there will be a lot of involvement actually, and extra on top. I mean, there will be a lot of regulations coming, but most likely it will more be an expansion of the areas where this law abides more than really even more tough rules. I don't think this is happening, but it's likely that it can be expanded. So I think one of the best things to do is to begin to have this way of making the models and monitoring the models and doing risk assessments, even if the area is not directly into high risk, because it might be, in the future, it might be that, hey, we are considering this high risk. This is also how legal is normally working, that based on precedents, well, we actually also think that this can be considered high risk. And actually, when you looked at the 9 different things I mentioned, they all make pretty good sense. I mean, the model should be explainable. I shouldn't use data that is not allowed to be used. It should be secure. So in a way, I think it can actually lift the level of professionalism when it comes to making models in your organization. So I think it can actually be a good thing from that perspective. But it's extremely important to always have this in mind. What is this made for? It's not made for business to business. It's not made for preventing AI on cases that has nothing to do with important events in the customer's life. I mean, that's not what it's made for. So please make sure that it's not used for that.
Yeah, it makes total logical sense. When another question that I see here is when using third-party AI vendors, who holds the legal responsibility for AI Act compliance, the vendor or the company?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think what we're looking at, if you can say only a user, I mean, then what you have to do is assess the risk of using the models. You have to make sure the data you put in are actually representable and allowed to be used. I mean, from a privacy perspective, you have to make sure that you report on the AI use and whether something incident happening, and then that's the fourth thing. You have to use the AI as instructed, and that's exactly where it gets a little bit blurry, just to be honest, because when you have foundation models, as I mentioned before, it's not very hard to actually make your own model. I mean, just by having, for instance, ChatGPT, beginning to feed it with a lot of data from your enterprise, and also doing a fixed priming that this is how it should use this data. That's not, then you are suddenly on a provider side, and that's your responsibility. So, and where the line is, how much of a, you can say, a modification you need to do is honestly still not determined. But I think you can say that if you're saying, okay, I'm using this right out of the box, no doubt that this is on the provider side. But if you are integrating this with your own data and doing an own priming of how it should work, that will most likely be the provider will most likely say, hey, wait a minute, I mean, you have got it to do X, Y, Z. That's not what we have made. So if you put an extra, if you tune your engine on your car, for instance, then the insurance is no longer holding, and that's the same here. If you begin to manipulate the model, it's on you, and that's unfortunately quite easy here.
Yeah, exactly. There are a few questions about applicability of the AI Act. So UK, as well as maybe US companies operating in EU versus EU companies operating in the UK or US. Do you have guidance on that?
I think the whole act is made on the principle of the law that has to do with approving products into EU. So basically physical products. That's where it came from.
Protecting EU citizens.
Yeah, protecting EU citizens from products that can make harm in EU. And that now they have used the same platform to look at AI products. So the idea is that if you are a UK company and you have AI products that you want to export into EU, basically you need to make sure that they comply with these 9 areas I talked about before. And when it comes to data, actually it also means that you should make sure that it's tested on representative data in the EU. So, I mean, it's not enough that you have been using this outside EU with data from outside EU citizens. It should actually be tested on EU citizen data. And that's one of the sort of the issues here. Got
it. Great. I think that we are almost up to the time. So thank you, Bent, for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. It's been a sort of highly illuminating conversation, so thanks.
Thank you very much for me.
Yeah. Thanks. Before we wrap up, I'd like to mention that you can download our report, Battle Against AI-Driven Identity Fraud. The QR code was on screen, but it's not now. Let me just see if I can bring it up again. Great. And we also have another webinar coming up, EU Wallet panel discussion on the 14th of May. So please keep an eye out on our website for more details. We will share more info on that via email soon. But that's going to be a sort of really interesting discussion with our own Esther McKay. And thank you for joining us. We hope that today's discussion offered valuable insights for you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great day.
Remember August 26th. Thank you.
Yes, August 26th as well. Thanks very much.